The flames devoured the Silver Dollar Saloon. Gun smoke curled through the air as the townspeople scattered like frightened birds. And there, through the firelight, he stood, Elias Granger, a man who once built fences and kept to himself. Now facing a human trafficker with nothing but a six-shooter on his hip and a promise carved into his soul. You burned her once, Clint, but this time you're the one who's going to feel the heat. Behind him, terrified women clutched each other. In front of him, guns were drawn. And justice, real justice, was just one heartbeat away. What happened next would change the entire town. But to understand why a rancher risked everything, you need to hear what led him to this fire. Let me take you back. The morning sun stretched lazily across the red dirt fields of the Granger Ranch, warming the brittle wood of the porch and glinting off the frost that still clung to the fence rails. A soft wind stirred the dust, whispering its secrets past the open window of the modest ranch house. Elias Granger stood in the doorway, boots planted, mug of black coffee cooling in his calloused hands. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He only watched. Inside, the girl, Mara Quinn, was dusting the high shelf above the hearth, standing on the tips of her bare feet. She reached upward, her back arched slightly, the worn fabric of her dress pulling taut across her thin shoulders. That's when Elias saw them. Not just bruises, not work injuries. These were burns, round, methodical, scars forged by something red-hot, pressed hard into the skin. And more than once. He froze mid-sip. The air seemed to leave the room. His jaw tightened as a chill crawled down his spine. Not from fear, but fury. Those marks didn't come from an accident. They were a message, a punishment, a threat. He knew cruelty. He'd worn a badge in another life, in a different territory. He'd seen what men could do when no one was watching, and now he was watching. Mara must have felt it, his silence. She turned suddenly, eyes wide, hand jerking her collar up in a flash. Her face went pale. I didn't mean to slack off, she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. I'll get back to the floor. I was just trying to reach the... Elias raised a hand gently. It's all right, he said, voice low and calm. You're not in trouble. But she wasn't listening. Her whole body went stiff, and her eyes scanned the room like a hunted thing. Please, she said, please don't send me away. That stopped him cold. Not, I didn't mean to, or it won't happen again. Just don't send me away. He set his mug down and leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He didn't come closer. She looked like she might bolt if he took a step. How long? He asked quietly. How long have you had those burns? Her throat bobbed. I don't know what you mean. Elias didn't flinch. The ones on your back. Circular, deep, too deliberate to be anything but what they are. A long silence stretched between them. Then Mara backed slowly until her shoulders touched the wall. Her breath quickened. Her fingers clutched her apron like a lifeline. I can work, she whispered. I clean good. I don't talk to anyone. I'll sleep in the barn if I have to. Just don't send me back. Back where? She didn't answer. He watched her carefully, saw the tremble in her hand, the way her right foot angled toward the door as if half her body wanted to run. He'd seen wounded animals in the wild, how they froze when cornered, waiting for mercy or death. He wasn't sure which she was expecting. After a long moment, he spoke again. You're safe here, Mara. I swear it. Something broke then, not loud, just a sound deep and low from her throat. She slid down the wall to the floor and sat with her knees pulled tight to her chest. Her voice came in fragments, like glass underfoot. Clint Marlowe. He runs the Silver Dollar Saloon. Elias's brow tightened. He knew the name. Everyone did. Wealthy, connected, untouchable. The kind of man who smiled when the law looked the other way. I worked there for months, she said, staring at the floorboards. Not as a dancer, not at first, just clean, brought drinks. He said I owed him for the train fare, for the food, for the clothes. I owed him forever. Her voice trembled now. When girls tried to run, he made examples. Hot iron poker, circular N. I saw it use. Then I felt it. Elias didn't speak. He couldn't. He has deals with Sheriff Boone, she went on. Even Judge Rowe owes him. Cards or women, I don't know which. The whole town belongs to him, and I ran. How'd you escape? He asked. There was a fire, not big, just smoke in the kitchen. I slipped out the back while the girls were screaming, and the bouncer ran for water. She looked up, finally meeting his gaze. I've been walking 2 weeks, barn to barn. I saw your notice in a shop window 2 towns over. Just needed somewhere small. Quiet. I thought maybe... Her voice broke. I thought maybe this was far enough. Elias's jaw worked slightly as he stared out the window. Far enough? Not for Clint Marlowe. Not if he wanted her back. Not if she still had scars that made him nervous. The wind had shifted by noon, bringing the scent of horse sweat and dust long before the sound of hooves reached the edge of Elias Granger's land. He'd known it would come. You don't see scars like that on a woman's back without someone coming to reclaim what they think they still own. He stepped onto the porch with the weight of inevitability in his bones. The coffee had long gone cold, untouched beside the rocking chair. But something else sat at his side now. An old wooden box, freshly opened. Inside it, oiled and loaded, rested the past he'd tried to leave buried. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, buckling the weathered leather holster around his waist. The Colt felt heavier than it used to, or maybe he just wasn't the same man who'd once worn it. A low thunder rolled across the prairie. Hoofbeats. 4 riders. He saw them crest the hill like ghosts out of dust. No need for introductions. The man at the front wore black like it was a uniform, his coat billowing behind him in the wind, face calm and arrogant beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Clint Marlowe. They didn't slow until they were within 20 yards of the porch. Marlowe reined in with flair, boots hitting the ground in a practiced dismount. Afternoon, he called, casual as a man borrowing sugar. You must be Granger. I must be, Elias replied, his voice low, neutral. Clint took a few steps forward, hands open, relaxed. But the 3 riders behind him stayed mounted, eyes scanning, hands never far from their pistols. I've heard good things, Marlowe said. Hard worker. Keeps to himself. Clean fences. Quiet life. Elias didn't answer. Shame that kind of peace is so easy to disturb. Still nothing. Clint smiled thinly. I believe you've got something that belongs to me. Elias finally spoke, voice steady as stone. You'll have to be more specific. She goes by Mara Quinn, Clint said, though she's used other names. Quiet girl, real obedient, tends to wander when she forgets who owns her. Elias's jaw flexed. She's not property. Everything's property, Clint replied smoothly. Depends on what you paid, and I've paid plenty. You didn't pay for those scars. That hit like a bullet. Clint blinked once, slowly. The smile didn't falter, but it no longer reached his eyes. Scars? He echoed. I saw what you did to her, Elias said. You marked her like livestock. That's not debt collection. That's cruelty. Clint took another step forward. The air tightened like a coiled spring. You don't know the full story, Granger, he said, voice colder now. Girls lie. People lie. They make things up when it suits them. Burns don't lie, Elias said flatly, and I'm not in the business of selling people. For a beat, no one moved. Then Clint laughed, a dry, joyless sound. You think you're a hero now? A cowboy with a cause? He asked. Let me give you a dose of truth, neighbor. Sheriff Boone won't lift a finger. Judge Rowe plays poker with me every Thursday. Hell, even the preacher blesses my whiskey barrels before shipment. So don't go thinking this ends in a courtroom. Elias didn't flinch. Marlowe's voice dropped lower. You've built yourself a nice place here, he said, nodding to the fields. The house, the barn. Be a shame if something happened to it. Dry land like this? Fires spread fast, livestock spook, neighbors forget your name. Elias stepped off the porch, slowly, calmly. The sun caught the glint of the Colt on his hip. I've fought men with less to lose and more to prove, he said. You want to come back here with fire and guns? You'll find out I didn't forget how to draw just because I hung up the badge. Clint's expression darkened. The riders behind him shifted uneasily. Then, finally, he turned. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion, cast a long glance at Elias and said, "This isn't over, Granger. Not by a long shot." They rode off into the dust. Inside the house, Mara had heard every word. She stood near the kitchen doorway, hands shaking, breath shallow. When Elias came in, she tried to speak, but the words never formed. She crumpled into the nearest chair, face in her hands. Her voice came out broken. "You don't know what you've done." Elias stood in silence, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the door where Marlowe had stood. "Yes," he said at last. "I do." And he knew they'd be back. Next time, they wouldn't come to talk. Clint Marlowe's bravado cracked like thin ice beneath a boot. Marshal Gideon Hale stood squarely in the firelight, his coat streaked with dust, his voice calm and cutting. He held up the leather folder, thick, worn at the edges, bound with a federal seal. "Inside this file," Hale said loud enough for the crowd to hear over the roar of the burning saloon, "are sworn affidavits from 5 women. All of them describe the same thing: branding, coercion, threats against their families. Different territories, same tactics, same man." He looked directly at Clint. "And the name that appears the most, Mr. Marlowe, is yours." The tension in the street turned electric. A hush fell over the townspeople, as if the fire itself paused to listen. Clint's eyes flicked toward his riders, still mounted, still ready, but their posture had shifted. Less eager, less sure. They hadn't expected the law to show up with evidence, with names. "Sheriff," Hale called over his shoulder, "I'm ordering you to detain Mr. Marlowe and his men on suspicion of federal crimes, human trafficking, interstate coercion, arson, and obstruction of justice." Sheriff Avery Boone looked like a man trying to swallow broken glass. Marshal, maybe we should talk privately," he stammered, glancing between Clint and the crowd. "We can't just—" "Sheriff," Hale said without turning his head, "do your duty, or I will deputize half the street to do it for you." Boone's hand trembled as he reached for the cuffs on his belt. Clint took one slow step backward. The fire's glow danced across his face, revealing something new in his eyes. Panic. "You think some papers and sob stories are enough to hang me?" he spat. "You think these people will turn on me after everything I've given this town?" "Given?" A woman's voice cut through the smoke. All heads turned again. From the crowd stepped a woman with silver-streaked hair and soot on her cheekbones. Her dress was singed at the hem, and in her hand she held a small glass bottle with a blackened cork, a bottle of lamp oil. Ruth Calder. "I remember what you gave me, Clint," she said, her voice trembling but loud. "I remember the night you told me I owed you. When I said no, you held me down. You pressed a poker to my shoulder and said no one would believe me anyway." She pulled down her shawl. Even in the flickering light, the burn mark was unmistakable. Circular, brutal, permanent. "You told us we were nothing, that we were replaceable, that girls like us came cheap. But we're not afraid of you anymore." Clint's jaw clenched. "Sheriff," Marshal Hale said again, this time sharper. Boone stepped forward, slowly, reluctantly. That was the moment Clint made his choice. With a sudden, sharp whistle, he turned and lunged for his horse. "Draw!" he shouted. Gunmetal flashed in the firelight. One of his men yanked a pistol from his holster, but the crowd had moved first. Half a dozen townsfolk ducked or dove behind barrels and wagons. Some screamed. Others ran. Elias Granger didn't flinch. His Colt was already in his hand before the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet struck the ground inches from Clint's boot, stopping him cold. Marshal Hale ducked behind the water trough, drawing his revolver in a single fluid motion. "Don't let them scatter," he barked. "Drop your weapons now." Another of Clint's men raised his gun toward the marshal, but he never got the shot off. A farmhand from the edge of the crowd slammed into him from behind, knocking the pistol from his grip. Sheriff Boone stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, torn between sides until the fourth rider aimed directly at him. Then instinct took over. He fired once, then again, his hand no longer trembling. Clint stood with his hands halfway raised, halfway reaching for the reins. And then Mara Quinn appeared, shotgun in hand. She stepped out from the alley behind the general store. Hair whipped by smoke, the barrel of the shotgun leveled straight at Clint's chest. "No more running," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Not from you." Clint hesitated, calculating, eyes darting, then lowered his hand slowly. "I'll burn before I hang," he said through clenched teeth. "You might," Elias called from the edge of the fire line. "But either way, you're done hurting women." The crowd closed in now, their silence louder than any war cry. Marshal Hale stepped forward, cuffs out, and locked them around Clint Marlowe's wrist with finality. "This is over," he said, but Ruth Calder shook her head slowly. "No, Marshal. For us, it's just beginning." For a heartbeat, everything stood still. Marshal Gideon Hale gripped Clint Marlowe's arm, the iron cuffs already fastened. The flames behind them crackled louder than any voice, casting long, twitching shadows across the dust-choked street. The townsfolk stood frozen, watching, wondering if it was truly over. But Clint Marlowe wasn't done. He gave a small chuckle, low and mocking, his voice carrying over the fire. "You really think this sticks?" he said, turning his head toward Hale. "A few scared girls, a burned-down building, and a federal badge? I've survived worse storms than this." "You're cuffed, Marlowe," Hale replied evenly. "And cuffs can be bought off like anything else," Clint said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think these people have the guts to stand behind you when the real pressure comes?" Elias didn't blink. "Funny," he said. "I don't see anyone standing with you." Ruth Calder stepped forward, her voice sharp. "They don't need guts to watch you fall, just enough memory not to forget what you did." Clint looked toward the crowd. His gaze scanned the faces. Some stared at him with fear, others with hatred, but none looked away. Then he saw it. Sheriff Avery Boone, standing beside the marshal. His hand still rested on the holster at his hip. But the fear was still in his eyes. Clint knew how to play fear. "You really want to go through with this, Boone," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You cuff me. You pick a side. You know who else gets burned in that fire?" Boone didn't answer. "You," Clint snapped. "I've got ledgers, letters, favors, people you owe. You drag me in, and I take you down with me." Boone's hand twitched. That's when Elias Granger stepped forward. Quiet, calm, Colt in hand, muzzle angled slightly down, but eyes locked. "Sheriff," Elias said, "you've got a choice to make. You gonna let that coward keep running this town? Or are you finally gonna do your damn job?" Clint laughed. "You? You think a washed-up rancher and a runaway girl make you brave?" He turned slightly toward Elias, testing the cuffs, grinning. "Bet that girl still jumps at her own shadow." That was when Mara Quinn stepped forward, shotgun in both hands. "I don't jump anymore," she said, her voice level, eyes locked on him. Clint's smile slipped. The silence shattered with a single shot. No one saw who fired first, just the spark, the scream, the burst of dust from a missed bullet. Then chaos exploded. Men shouted, guns roared, smoke choked the air as townsfolk ducked and scattered. Clint twisted, using Hale's grip as leverage, slamming a shoulder into the marshal and breaking free just long enough to dive behind a water trough. One of his riders, still loyal, fired wildly toward the crowd. Sheriff Boone hesitated, pistol raised but frozen. A second bullet cracked past Elias, and he dropped into a crouch behind a wagon. He spotted Mara near the feed store, pinned down but steady, her shotgun resting across a barrel. "Wait for your shot," Elias called. "Don't waste it." She nodded once, jaw clenched, eyes fierce. More voices rose now, not from men with guns, but from the edge of the square. A group of women stepped forward through the smoke and flame. Ruth Calder led them, her voice loud and unwavering. "That's him. That's the man who hurt us. I have the scars. He locked me in the cellar." Each step forward was a rebellion, each word a wound reopened. Clint heard them, and he saw something worse than a bullet in their eyes. Truth, the kind that didn't die in smoke. He ran, toward the alley, toward the flames, toward whatever hole would swallow him. But Ruth didn't move. She still held the bottle, the one with lamp oil at the bottom, the one he'd handed her once, telling her to clean the floor or it'll be her face next. She didn't raise it to throw. She just stepped into his path, calmly, blocking his way. He skidded to a halt, breathing hard. "Move," he growled, but she didn't. Her voice was almost a whisper now. "You said no one would believe me. You said no one would care. But here we are, Clint, and everyone's watching." Clint raised a hand. Not to strike, not to shoot, just to reach. You're done, Ruth said. No more fire, no more running. Marshal Hale appeared behind him, gun drawn. Clint Marlowe didn't resist this time. His knees gave way. The man who had burned women, bought silence, and ruled a town with fear, collapsed into the dirt like he weighed nothing at all. By morning, the fire had finally burned itself out. The Silver Dollar Saloon was gone, reduced to blackened beams and ash-covered stone. The scent of smoke still clung to the air, mixing with dew and dust. Sunlight filtered through the scorched skeletons of what had once been the town's most untouchable building, revealing the smoldering remnants of a kingdom built on silence and fear. But something else rose in the ashes that day. Truth, freedom, and a kind of justice that didn't wear a suit or a collar, but a badge worn by calloused hands and a man who had once sworn off fighting altogether. Elias Granger stood at the edge of the destruction for a long while. Long after Marshal Gideon Hale had hauled Clint Marlowe into custody, long after the townsfolk had stopped whispering. The weight of what had happened sat heavy on his shoulders. Not guilt, but gravity. Sheriff Avery Boone had resigned that morning without a word. Judge Calder Rowe had vanished before sunrise, his poker debts and silence catching up to him in ways that no gavel could save. And as for the women, Mara, Ruth Calder, and others who had come out of hiding, Marshal Hale had already begun the paperwork. The federal programs offered them shelter, relocation, therapy, new names if they wanted them. For the first time in years, they were allowed to dream beyond survival. The town, still stunned, had no choice but to face itself in the mirror. Later that day, Elias sat on his porch. The wooden chair creaked softly beneath him. The sky above was streaked with lavender and gold as dawn broke over the hills, casting gentle light across the fields. Mara Quinn sat beside him, wrapped in a borrowed quilt, a chipped mug of tea cradled in her hands. Her hair was pulled back now, no longer tangled, no longer hiding. Her eyes, still tired, carried something else too. Calm. She stared out at the horizon for a long time before speaking. "So, what now?" she asked. Elias didn't answer right away. He reached beside him and picked up the object that had waited years in silence. A leather badge holder. The tin star inside was dulled with time, its edges worn, but the weight of it was unmistakable. He turned it slowly in his hand, as if deciding whether it still belonged to him. "That depends," he said quietly, "on what kind of men we decide to be." Mara looked at him. "You still believe that matters?" He nodded once. "I didn't for a while," he said. "I figured doing the right thing just meant losing more. Friends, peace, quiet. But turns out peace without justice ain't peace. Just a prettier name for giving up." He stood and slipped the badge into his coat pocket. Not out of pride, but readiness. Behind them, the town was stirring again. For the first time, people weren't just opening stores, they were opening eyes. "They'll talk about what you did," Mara said. "Some will say you were reckless." Elias smiled faintly. "Some always do." She looked back to the field, then at him again. "Do you regret it?" He didn't hesitate. Not for a second. She sipped her tea, letting the silence settle comfortably between them. "I thought I was running from something," she said softly. "But maybe I was running towards something. I just didn't know what yet." "You found it," Elias said. She looked at him. "Not me," he added quickly. "Not just me. A life. A voice. You stood up." Her eyes softened. "You gave me the space too." Elias looked away toward the road leading out of town. "I just lit the match," he said. "You carried the fire." Mara smiled softly, then looked toward the east. "Then maybe it's time I help others carry it too," she said, voice quiet but certain. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it walks into the fire with nothing but truth in its hands. The story of Elias Granger and Mara Quinn may be set in the past, but its message echoes today. Because in every time, in every town, there are those who suffer in silence, and those who must choose whether or not to stand beside them. We live in an age where speaking up is still risky, where power still protects the wrong people. But this story reminds us, it only takes one person, one rancher, one witness, one survivor, to turn the tide. Maybe that person is you. In a world full of noise, kindness is still radical, and courage, it's still contagious. So tell me, what would you have done in Elias's place? Would you risk everything for a stranger who showed up with scars and secrets? Have you ever had to stand against someone more powerful simply because it was right? Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this story moved you, please consider sharing it. Click like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you won't miss what's coming next. We've got more stories, real, raw, and unforgettable. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring, because sometimes the only thing standing between darkness and hope is a porch light left on by someone who still believes. We'll see you next time.